The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The atmosphere was tense, thick with the weight of a million eyes watching, waiting, and judging. Outside the building, the press had gathered in a frenzy, their cameras flashing as they waited for any sign of the man at the center of it all. Elon Musk was about to face the greatest challenge of his career, one that was not in the boardroom, nor in the high-tech labs of SpaceX or Tesla, but in the courtroom. The lawsuit had come as a shock to everyone. No one had expected the business mogul, the visionary behind Tesla's electric revolution and SpaceX's push into the stars, to find himself embroiled in a legal battle. And yet, here he was, sitting quietly at the defendant's table, surrounded by a team of lawyers, looking remarkably calm for someone whose entire reputation was on the line. "Good afternoon, Mr. Musk," the judge began, his voice calm but firm as he peered over the rim of his glasses. "I trust you've been briefed on the nature of the charges?" Elon nodded, his expression unreadable. His mind was elsewhere, not on the lawsuit itself but on the many layers of tension that had built up around it. For the past few weeks, the media had been relentless in their coverage. Rumors, accusations, and unverified claims had flooded the airwaves. Allegations of financial mismanagement, insider trading, and corporate negligence had sent shockwaves through the stock market, leaving investors nervous and skeptical about the future of his companies. But it wasn't just the outside world that was in chaos. Within the walls of his companies, his employees were watching, wondering if the man who had once promised to take them to Mars would be able to navigate this unexpected challenge. His personal life, too, had taken a hit. The public scrutiny of his every move had become suffocating, and his relationships with colleagues, friends, and even family members were beginning to fray under the pressure. Elon didn't look rattled. In fact, he appeared almost detached, as though he were watching the events unfold from a distance. But inside, a storm was brewing. The weight of the case was crushing. For someone who had faced rocket explosions, financial setbacks, and public scrutiny throughout his career, this lawsuit was different. It wasn't a problem he could simply fix with innovation or technology. It was personal. It was about him, his credibility, his integrity, and his vision for the future. "What's going to happen now?" the voice in his head asked. "Will I be able to weather this storm?" He didn't have an answer. The only thing he knew for sure was that he had to fight. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a battle for everything he had worked for. And if there was one thing Elon Musk had learned over the years, it was that you never back down from a fight. Not when the stakes were this high. Just then, the doors of the courtroom swung open, and a figure entered. The moment he stepped inside, a collective gasp swept through the room. It was not an unfamiliar face, but one that struck a chord with almost everyone present. It was a high-powered lawyer, one of the best in the business, known for taking down the most formidable of adversaries. Elon's eyes flickered briefly to the new arrival, but he didn't show any sign of concern. The lawyers who had been hired to defend him were more than capable. He didn't need to worry about the people sitting around him. What concerned him now was the challenge of this fight, of outsmarting the system that seemed determined to bring him down. And then, in a move no one had expected, Elon stood up. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room, his gaze momentarily locking with the judge's. The courtroom fell silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Elon Musk," the judge said, his voice betraying a hint of curiosity. "What can we do for you, Mr. Musk?" For a brief moment, Elon hesitated. It wasn't often that he had to speak in such a formal setting, and the weight of the moment hit him in a way he hadn't anticipated. But then, he cleared his throat, his voice steady as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, I've been listening to the proceedings and reviewing the evidence presented. And I think it's time I make it clear that I'm not going to sit idly by. I'm not going to allow the narrative surrounding this lawsuit to be dictated by others. I've spent my life solving problems, and that's exactly what I plan to do now. I intend to represent myself in this case." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Was this some kind of stunt? Everyone knew Elon Musk was brilliant, but law. Wasn't that a different beast altogether? The judge looked taken aback but nodded slowly. You wish to represent yourself? The judge asked, his tone neutral, though the skepticism was evident. Yes, Your Honor, Elon replied, his voice firm and unwavering. I've never been one to shy away from a challenge, and this is no different. I'll ensure that the facts are presented accurately, and I'll make sure this case is heard from all sides. I'm not going to let anyone twist the truth. There was a pause as the judge regarded him, and for a moment, Elon thought he might be denied. But after a long silence, the judge spoke again. Very well, Mr. Musk. You may proceed. But be advised, the court will not tolerate any disruptions. Elon nodded, then took his seat again. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. People shifted in their chairs, some unsure of what to make of this bold move. Was he out of his mind? Or was this just another example of the audacity that had made Elon Musk who he was? As the proceedings continued, the weight of what was happening began to sink in. This was no ordinary case. It wasn't just about the legalities of business. This was a showdown, and it would require every ounce of Elon's genius and determination to come out on top. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered, hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Elon Musk, the answer had always been the same, never giving up. But as he faced this courtroom, he wondered if even his unwavering drive would be enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't born into the life of fame and fortune that many assumed he had always known. His story, like so many of the great innovators, was one of struggle, ambition, and, above all, a relentless desire to change the world. To understand why he stood in that courtroom today, one had to look back at the man before the mogul, the boy who dared to dream far beyond the ordinary. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, Elon was the son of a Canadian mother, May, and a South African father, Errol. His childhood was anything but easy. At a young age, Elon found himself deeply immersed in technology, a passion sparked by an old computer his father had given him. It wasn't the happiest of households. His parents' relationship was strained, and at the age of 10, his parents divorced, leaving Elon to navigate a difficult period in his life largely on his own. As a child, Elon wasn't like other kids. While most of his peers were playing outside or engaging in typical childhood activities, Elon was absorbed in his books and computers. He was an introvert, often bullied at school, and would later recall these years with a sense of isolation. But those early experiences shaped the person he would become, a man who would not let anything or anyone stand in the way of his ambitions. By the age of 12, Elon had already taught himself how to program, creating his first video game called Blaster, a space-themed adventure game, which he sold for $500. It wasn't much, but it was a sign of things to come. In his early teens, Elon developed an unshakable belief that he could change the world through technology. This idea, deeply embedded in him, would grow into the driving force behind every one of his ventures. However, there was one element of Elon's life that would later become crucial to his future success: his mother's unwavering support. May Musk, a model and dietitian, was a woman of incredible strength. She raised Elon and his siblings with a sense of independence and resilience that would become integral to their success. She believed in Elon's potential, even when the world around him didn't. Her faith in him was unshakable, even when times were hard. When Elon was 17, he left South Africa to pursue his education in Canada. He attended Queen's University for 2 years before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. He earned degrees in both economics and physics, fields that would later form the backbone of his innovations. But it wasn't the degrees that defined Elon, it was his relentless hunger for knowledge and his desire to make a difference. After completing his studies, Elon's drive to change the world took him to Silicon Valley, where he would make his mark. He founded Zip2, an online city guide software, which was eventually sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million. But that wasn't enough. Elon's ambitions were far bigger. With the money from the sale, he turned his attention to other industries, each more daring than the last. In 1999, he co-founded X.com, an online payment company that would later become PayPal. His involvement with PayPal was short but impactful, and when it was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in stock, Elon found himself a multimillionaire at the age of 31. Yet, even with all that wealth, Elon was still not satisfied. Money, he believed, was a means to an end, not the end itself. Elon had always been fascinated by space travel. From an early age, he dreamed of making life multiplanetary, of pushing humanity beyond the confines of Earth. This vision led him to establish SpaceX in 2002 with the goal of reducing space transportation costs and making it possible to colonize Mars. He had no background in aerospace engineering, but he was driven by a deep passion and the belief that humanity's future lay in the stars. Despite early setbacks, failed rocket launches and a near-bankruptcy situation, Elon remained committed to his dream. SpaceX's eventual success, including the first privately funded spacecraft to reach orbit, was a testament to his unyielding perseverance and vision. Simultaneously, he took the reins of Tesla Motors in 2004, a company that had been struggling to produce electric cars. He saw the potential to revolutionize the automotive industry and was determined to make electric vehicles not just a viable alternative but a desirable one. His leadership turned Tesla into the giant it is today, with its sleek electric cars winning accolades worldwide. Through all of these successes, Elon's approach to business remained unorthodox. He was never afraid to take risks. In fact, he often put his own money on the line, investing in his ventures when others doubted him. There were times when SpaceX and Tesla teetered on the edge of failure, and his personal fortune was on the line. But he pushed forward, driven by the belief that his companies were not just about making money, they were about changing the world. And that was the core of Elon Musk, a man whose ambitions were larger than life itself. He had a vision, and he was willing to sacrifice anything, his wealth, his reputation, and even his personal life, to achieve it. To the outside world, he was seen as a genius, an innovator, and a billionaire entrepreneur. But behind the public persona, there was a man who, like anyone else, faced his own battles. As Elon sat in the courtroom, surrounded by his legal team, his mind wandered to those battles, the sleepless nights, the constant pressure, the relentless media scrutiny. The courtroom was just another challenge in a long line of obstacles he had overcome. But this time, it felt different. This time, he wasn't just facing an investor or a competitor. He was facing the very system that had always been a part of the world he had sought to change. The trial wasn't just about defending himself, it was about defending his vision. The stakes were higher than ever. If he lost this case, it wouldn't just be a financial setback. It would be a blow to everything he had worked for, everything he believed in. And if there was one thing Elon Musk hated more than anything else, it was losing. As the trial began to take shape, the battle lines were drawn. On one side, Elon's legal team, prepared to defend his every move. On the other, a powerful opposing counsel, armed with allegations that threatened to undo everything Elon had built. But this wasn't just about the legal system, it was about something deeper, the fight for Elon's legacy. And so, as the gavel fell and the trial officially began, Elon Musk was ready. He had faced many challenges in his life, rocket failures, electric car skepticism, public controversies, but this time, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the future. As the proceedings continued, the world would soon learn just how sharp Elon Musk's legal mind truly was. The courtroom, once bustling with reporters and murmurs of anticipation, grew increasingly still as the trial progressed. Elon Musk, though outwardly calm, could feel the weight of the world bearing down on him. His thoughts remained laser-focused, not on the battle at hand but on the larger implications, the reputation of his companies, his personal brand, and the future of everything he had worked so tirelessly to build. If he lost, it could send shockwaves through every industry he had touched. The first day of the trial had passed in a blur of legal jargon, objections, and motions. Elon wasn't an expert in the law, he knew enough to make informed decisions, but this was an arena where even the most successful businessmen could be caught off guard. His legal team was top tier, but nothing could shield him from the mounting pressure of being the one in the hot seat. As the trial entered its second day, Elon sat in silence, listening to his defense attorney, Mark Davis, argue the finer points of the case. Mark was a seasoned lawyer, quick on his feet, sharp in his arguments, but even he was visibly frustrated. The opposing side, led by the notorious litigator Christine Blake, was relentless. She was known for her ability to destroy reputations, to dissect every detail with precision. The stakes had never felt so high. Christine had already outlined her case in dramatic fashion. She painted a picture of a reckless CEO, one who had put personal ambition ahead of ethical business practices. She called into question Elon's handling of Tesla's financials and SpaceX's dubious dealings with government contracts. To her, Elon Musk was the embodiment of corporate greed, a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his grandiose vision, even at the expense of others. But Elon knew this was not who he was. Yes, he had pushed the envelope, sometimes beyond what was deemed reasonable, but his drive had always been about something bigger than himself. He wasn't in this for the money or the fame. He was in it for the future, of technology, of humanity, of the earth and beyond. Elon leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, thinking back to his early days. The ambition that had driven him to create and innovate was still the same, even if the road had become far more treacherous than he ever anticipated. He had always taken risks, sometimes dangerous ones. But when you're trying to change the world, you can't play it safe. You have to bet everything on your vision. His thoughts were interrupted as Christine Blake stood up to make her case. She was a force to be reckoned with, confident and precise in her delivery. She addressed the jury, her voice cold and calculating. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, locking eyes with each member of the jury, "we are here today because a man chose to prioritize his own dreams over the well-being of the people who believed in him. A man who portrayed himself as a visionary, but whose decisions have put everything he built at risk." Elon's jaw clenched as he listened, but he didn't flinch. He had heard these accusations before. The media had painted him as a villain for years, as someone who couldn't be trusted. What Christine didn't understand, what no one truly understood, was the toll it took to balance such monumental aspirations with the reality of running multiple companies. There were moments when he doubted himself, when he questioned his choices. But giving up wasn't an option. Not now. Christine continued, "We have evidence that Mr. Musk, while positioning himself as the face of innovation, engaged in deceptive practices to inflate his company's value. He misled investors, made promises he couldn't keep, and ultimately put the lives of his employees at risk, all in the name of progress." Elon's eyes opened, and he looked across the courtroom at the jury. There were moments in his life when he had doubted his ability to succeed, to change the world, but today, he felt something different. Today, he was angry, not at Christine, but at the system that made it so easy to tear someone down without ever understanding their true intentions. As the trial continued, the opposing counsel presented witness after witness, each one trying to connect Elon's decisions to allegations of corporate malfeasance. The more Christine spoke, the more Elon's frustration grew. It was as though they were all missing the bigger picture, the lives he had changed, the innovations he had brought to life, the risks he had taken for the greater good. He knew he couldn't just sit back and let this narrative take shape. That night, as Elon sat alone in his hotel room, he pulled out a notepad and began writing. His thoughts flowed onto the page, but not in the way he expected. It wasn't a defense of himself. It wasn't a counterargument to the lies being told. No, he wrote about something else entirely. He wrote about why he had started this journey in the first place. He wrote about his vision for a future that extended beyond Earth's boundaries, a world where humanity could be truly sustainable. He wrote about the sacrifices he had made and the ones he would continue to make, not for personal gain, but because he believed in something greater than himself. The next day, Elon made an unanticipated decision. He would take the stand. As the trial resumed, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Everyone knew that this would be the moment of truth. The prosecution had laid its case. The defense had countered. Now, it was time for Elon Musk himself to speak. His legal team, though surprised by his decision, did not object. Mark Davis had already prepped him thoroughly on what to say, but Elon knew that today, he couldn't just recite a script. He had to speak from the heart. When the judge called on him, Elon stood up slowly and walked to the witness stand, his eyes scanning the room. For a moment, he felt like the weight of the entire world was on his shoulders. But then he remembered something his mother always told him: don't let fear control you. Let your belief in your vision drive you. Elon sat down, took a deep breath, and began speaking. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, his voice was steady, but there was an intensity to it. I've spent my life trying to build a future that's worth living for. I've made mistakes, sure. I've pushed people too hard. I've taken risks that others would never dream of taking. But everything I've done has been with one goal in mind: to ensure that humanity has a future beyond the limitations of this planet. He paused, making sure every word resonated with the jury. I know I've made mistakes. But I've always learned from them. And I've always done my best to correct them. I've never misled anyone with the intent to deceive. My goal has always been to push forward, to push the boundaries of what we think is possible. And if that's a crime, then I'll accept it. But if it's a crime to dream, to strive, to risk everything for a better world, then I ask you, what kind of future are we trying to protect? The courtroom was silent. Even Christine Blake, whose reputation for ruthless tactics had preceded her, didn't immediately respond. Elon's words had struck a chord. The first day of Elon Musk's testimony was over, but it was clear that the battle was far from won. His strategy was bold, and it was risky, but it was also exactly what he needed. If he was going to win this case, it wouldn't be through the defense of the facts alone. It would be through showing the jury the heart of his mission, the vision that had driven him from the beginning. And as the day came to a close, one thing was clear: the court battle was far from over. But Elon Musk was ready. He had faced impossible odds before. This time, he would face them head-on. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense as the trial continued. Day after day, the legal battle between Elon Musk's defense and Christine Blake's prosecution waged on, with each side digging deeper into the facts. What had begun as a relatively straightforward corporate legal matter had now taken on a more profound significance. The public, captivated by the unfolding drama, was growing increasingly invested. Elon Musk's name was no longer just attached to his companies, his personal reputation was on the line. Elon sat in the courtroom, his thoughts a whirlwind. He had expected the legal challenges, the intense questioning, the endless scrutiny of his actions. But there was something else, the quiet undercurrent of doubt creeping into his mind. It wasn't about the trial itself, but about the larger world around him. The stakes were bigger than just defending his companies. This was a fight for everything he had built. A world where he could push the boundaries of space travel, a world where clean energy was no longer a dream but a reality. The trial had become more than a legal matter. It was a test of his very vision. For the first time in a long while, Elon found himself grappling with something he rarely allowed himself to confront: his vulnerabilities. The relentless pressure of balancing his companies and ambitions had begun to take its toll on him, both physically and emotionally. The late nights, the long meetings, the constant firefighting, it was all catching up with him. But there was no time to dwell on that now. The trial was still far from over. On this particular day, Elon was waiting for his turn to testify again. His legal team had done their best to discredit some of the prosecution's claims, but Christine Blake was relentless. She had a way of twisting facts, taking statements out of context, and using every legal tactic to keep the pressure on. Elon knew that her ultimate goal was to paint him as a reckless, arrogant billionaire who had crossed ethical lines in his pursuit of greatness. But Elon had already delivered his most powerful testimony. What else could he do? Then, just as he was about to zone out and retreat into his thoughts, a sudden turn of events caught his attention. Christine Blake was standing up, preparing to introduce her next witness, a surprise witness, one who had never been mentioned in the pre-trial discussions. "Your Honor," Christine said, addressing the judge with an air of quiet triumph, "I would like to call Mr. Jared Collins to the stand." The name was unfamiliar to most in the courtroom, but to Elon, it was a name he had hoped to never hear again. Jared Collins was a former Tesla executive, a man who had been at the company during one of its most turbulent periods. Elon had known him well, and he had trusted him. But that trust had been shattered years ago. Jared Collins was the one person who had known the inner workings of Tesla during the company's darkest days, the one person who had seen firsthand the struggles and mistakes made behind closed doors. But what truly made him dangerous to Elon was the fact that Jared had a personal grudge, a betrayal that Elon had tried to bury. Jared had been part of the small group that had opposed Elon's vision for the company, and when he was quietly removed from Tesla's leadership team, he hadn't taken it well. The personal animosity between them had only intensified over the years. As Jared walked into the courtroom, Elon's heart sank. He could feel the weight of the moment. Jared had always been a brilliant mind, but also someone prone to bitterness and resentment when things didn't go his way. Elon had tried to avoid contact with him after the split, knowing that Jared's pride would never allow him to let go of the past. Now, here he was, about to testify against him in the most critical moment of his career. Jared, now in his mid-40s, walked confidently to the witness stand, his eyes briefly meeting Elon's before turning away. There was no warmth in his gaze, only coldness, a chilling reminder of the animosity that had once defined their professional relationship. As Jared took the oath, Elon could already sense the storm that was about to hit. But he wasn't about to give up without a fight. Christine Blake smiled inwardly. She knew that Jared's testimony would be the breaking point in her case. Jared had the inside knowledge that could potentially destroy Elon's carefully crafted image. What she didn't know was that Elon had a plan of his own. "I'm aware, Mr. Collins, that you worked closely with Mr. Musk during your time at Tesla," Christine began, her voice smooth and calculating. "Can you tell us about the decision-making process behind some of the company's most controversial moments? Specifically, the questionable financial maneuvers that were made to ensure Tesla's survival in the early days." Jared cleared his throat and began his testimony, recounting moments of tension, financial strain, and the aggressive tactics Elon had employed to keep Tesla afloat. He spoke of the sleepless nights, the desperate measures taken to avoid bankruptcy, and the instances where Elon had made risky decisions, often ignoring the advice of the board or investors. Jared's words were sharp and precise, each one painting a picture of a CEO who was willing to go to great lengths to preserve his company, at any cost. Mr. Musk often made decisions that seemed reckless, decisions that prioritized his vision over the immediate stability of the company, Jared continued, his voice tinged with bitterness. He would manipulate financial reports to avoid the perception of failure, and at times, he ignored the concerns of those around him. As Jared's testimony unfolded, Elon's mind raced. The accusations were harsh, but they weren't entirely untrue. Elon had pushed Tesla to the brink time and time again, always believing that if he could just make it through one more crisis, one more hurdle, the company would be on solid ground. There were times when he'd bent the truth to keep investors happy, times when he'd done what he had to do to ensure the survival of the company. But had he done anything illegal? That was the key question, and it was one Elon knew he needed to answer. The courtroom was silent as Jared's words lingered in the air. The jury watched intently, their eyes shifting between the two men, Elon, the visionary, and Jared, the bitter former ally turned whistleblower. The tension was palpable, and for a moment, it seemed as though the courtroom itself was holding its breath. Then, with a calmness that belied his internal chaos, Elon stood up. It was time to confront the past, and Jared, head-on. He would not let this man, this bitter former employee, shape the narrative of his life. If this trial was to define him, he would do so on his own terms. The defense team exchanged uneasy glances as Elon made his way to the witness stand. No one had expected this. But Elon knew that the only way to survive this battle was to show the jury who he really was, the man who had built Tesla, who had put everything on the line to make it succeed. The man who had made mistakes but had always done so with the best intentions. As Elon sat back down on the witness stand, he locked eyes with Jared, his former colleague, and for the first time in years, he felt a surge of confidence. "Jared," Elon began, his voice steady, "you were there when it all started. You know better than anyone the lengths we went to in order to make Tesla a success. Yes, we took risks. Yes, we had to bend the rules sometimes. But every decision we made was with the goal of saving this company, of making a future for ourselves, for our families, and for the world." The courtroom was silent as Elon spoke, his words carrying weight, conviction, and, most importantly, truth. "We fought not just for the money," Elon continued, his voice rising slightly. "We fought for a dream. And that dream is still alive. Tesla is still alive. So, yes, we made mistakes. But it wasn't for lack of trying. It was because we believed in something bigger than ourselves." Elon paused, his eyes never leaving Jared's. "And that's something you'll never understand, Jared. Because you were never about the vision. You were about the paycheck." The courtroom gasped, and Jared's face turned red. The tension had just reached its peak. Elon had just flipped the script in a way no one saw coming. The courtroom was alive with the echo of Elon's words, and for a brief moment, everything stood still. The tension in the room was palpable as both sides processed the weight of what had just happened. Elon's statement had shifted the dynamics of the trial in ways no one had anticipated. The jury, previously hanging on every word Jared Collins had uttered, now found themselves confronted with a new narrative, a narrative that painted Elon Musk not as a corporate villain, but as a visionary who had fought against overwhelming odds to create something extraordinary. Jared Collins, visibly rattled by Elon's direct confrontation, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face, once flush with confidence, now carried a tinge of uncertainty. It was clear to everyone in the room that Elon's words had struck a nerve. His directness had caught Jared off guard, and for a moment, the tables had turned. Elon's eyes remained fixed on Jared as if daring him to respond, but the former executive remained silent. The defense team was visibly relieved, though they kept their composure. Mark Davis, Elon's lead attorney, leaned in to whisper, "Well done, Elon. That was exactly what we needed." Elon didn't respond immediately. He kept his eyes locked on Jared, his mind racing. He had never been one to shy away from conflict, but this was different. This wasn't just about defending his companies, it was about confronting the very core of his beliefs, the ones that had driven him to this moment. Jared had been part of his journey, a part he had once trusted. Now, he had become an obstacle, a man willing to tear down everything Elon had built for his own gain. The judge, sensing the intensity in the room, cleared his throat. "Mr. Musk," he said, breaking the silence, "please take your seat. Mr. Collins, you may respond." Jared, still visibly shaken, finally stood up. His voice trembled slightly, but he tried to regain his composure. "Elon," he said, his eyes narrowing, "it's easy for you to sit there and talk about vision and dreams, but the truth is, you manipulated us all. You were so consumed with your future that you didn't care who got burned in the process. You didn't care that the people around you were struggling. You pushed us to the brink, and you pushed us hard, all for the sake of your ego. The courtroom once again held its breath. The venom in Jared's words was undeniable. His bitterness had fueled the anger in his testimony, but Elon remained calm. He had known this would happen. The truth had always been more complex than the simplistic narrative Jared was trying to sell. Elon leaned forward, speaking with deliberate clarity. "You're wrong, Jared," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I didn't push anyone for the sake of my ego. I pushed for the future. You were there. You saw it. You knew the risks. We didn't have time to be careful. The world needed what we were creating. And sometimes, that means making tough choices. But the last thing I ever wanted to do was hurt anyone." Jared scoffed, clearly unconvinced. "And that's exactly the problem, Elon. You always believed you were right. You never listened to anyone who disagreed with you. You made us feel like we were part of a revolution, but when things didn't go as planned, you cast us aside." Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't back down. He was used to criticism. Hell, he had faced more than his fair share over the years. But this was different. This was someone who had once been part of his inner circle, someone who knew the ins and outs of Tesla's early struggles. And yet, here he was, using that insider knowledge to tear him down. "I didn't cast you aside, Jared," Elon said, his tone sharper now. "You chose to leave. I gave you a chance to be part of something extraordinary. You chose not to take it. You walked away because you couldn't see the vision the way I did. And that's your choice. But don't sit here and pretend you understand what it takes to create a company like Tesla." There was a moment of silence in the courtroom as the weight of Elon's words hung in the air. The jury watched closely, clearly moved by the exchange. For the first time, it felt like they were seeing a different side of Elon Musk, a side that was human, vulnerable, but resolute. Christine Blake, sensing that Jared's testimony was losing its potency, quickly interjected. "Your Honor, I would like to redirect," she said, her voice calm but forceful. "Mr. Collins, let me ask you this, do you believe Mr. Musk acted with full knowledge of the potential consequences of his decisions? Did he put the company's interests above all else, regardless of the cost to others?" Jared's expression softened, and he hesitated for a moment before responding. "Yes, I believe he did. He was obsessed with success, and he believed that any cost, whether it was financial, emotional, or ethical, was justified if it meant Tesla succeeded." Elon's fists clenched at his sides, but he remained composed. He had known that Jared's testimony would contain elements of truth, but he also knew it would be manipulated. What Jared failed to understand, or chose to ignore, was the passion behind every decision Elon had made. Every sacrifice had been made for the greater good. The exchange between Elon and Jared marked a significant turning point in the trial. The courtroom, which had once been filled with a sense of inevitability, now felt like a battleground where the outcome was far from clear. It was no longer a matter of simply defending Tesla's practices or reputation, it was a fight for Elon's character and integrity. The jury had been presented with two conflicting narratives, one of a man driven by ambition, willing to do whatever it took to succeed, and another of a visionary who had faced countless challenges to build something that would change the world. As the day drew to a close, the tension in the room remained thick. Elon knew that this trial was far from over. There would be more witnesses, more arguments, more twists and turns in the coming days. But for the first time, he felt like he had taken control of the narrative. He had confronted the past and shown the jury who he truly was. And in doing so, he had planted a seed of doubt in their minds about the accusations against him. That night, as Elon sat alone in his hotel room, he couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure, he was not going to let this trial define him. The world needed more than just the truth of the courtroom, it needed the truth of his vision. And that, he would continue to fight for, no matter what. The following days of the trial felt like a blur to Elon. Each morning, he woke up to the suffocating reality of the courtroom, where every move he made was under scrutiny, every word he spoke dissected and analyzed. The jury watched him carefully, and the media was relentless, broadcasting every moment live. The pressure was mounting, but Elon had always thrived under pressure. It was his fuel, his constant companion. But now, it felt different. This was personal. Elon had fought battles before, some bigger than others, but none quite like this. The accusations being hurled at him felt like an attack on everything he had built, everything he had worked for. His legacy was on the line. Tesla, SpaceX, and all of his companies, their futures depended on the outcome of this trial. It wasn't just his reputation at stake anymore, it was the world's future. The fight was no longer just for the defense of his name, it was for the survival of his mission. The prosecution's case had seemed to lose steam after Elon's powerful counterattack, but Christine Blake was not someone who gave up easily. She was methodical, calculating, and relentless in her pursuit of victory. She had only begun to scratch the surface, and Elon knew that she wasn't about to let up. That morning, as Elon sat in the courtroom awaiting the continuation of the trial, he felt a sense of foreboding. Christine's team had been unusually quiet the past few days, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were preparing something big. Something that would change the course of the trial. And sure enough, just after the morning recess, Christine stood and called a new witness to the stand, a name that made Elon's stomach churn. "Your Honor," she began, her voice smooth but sharp, "I would like to call Mr. Alexander Ford to the stand." Elon froze. Alexander Ford. The name brought a wave of memories rushing back, memories he had tried to bury. Ford was a former financial advisor at Tesla, someone who had worked closely with Elon in the company's earliest days. He had been part of the team during the most tumultuous times, when Tesla was fighting for survival. Ford had left Tesla under less than ideal circumstances, but Elon had never expected him to resurface in such a dramatic way. Ford had been the one to advise Elon on many of the risky financial maneuvers that had kept Tesla afloat during its darkest moments. The same maneuvers that Jared Collins had alluded to in his testimony. And now, here was Ford, ready to testify against him. This was bad. Very bad. The man who stepped forward was tall, well-dressed, and exuded an air of confidence that made Elon uneasy. His sharp eyes met Elon's for a brief moment, and then quickly flicked away. It was clear that Ford had come to do more than just provide testimony, he had come to destroy the narrative Elon had so carefully built. As Ford took the stand and was sworn in, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Christine began her questioning, and it didn't take long for Ford to start laying out the damning details of Tesla's financial operations under Elon's leadership. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he recounted the financial strategies that had kept Tesla on life support during its early years. "Mr. Musk," Ford began, looking directly at Elon, "has always been a visionary, there's no doubt about that. But that vision came at a cost. I was there, helping him navigate the complicated financial waters. There were times when we had to make decisions that pushed the boundaries of what's ethical, decisions that I believe were done with the intention of saving the company, but which were also done in a way that, at times, disregarded the law." Christine nodded, her expression one of approval. She was reeling in the jury with each word. Ford's calm demeanor and matter-of-fact tone made his words all the more chilling. "Can you elaborate on these decisions, Mr. Ford?" Christine asked, her voice smooth but filled with intent. Ford took a deep breath, then continued. "For example, there were instances where the company's financial reports were adjusted to make the numbers look more favorable than they actually were. This was not unusual in the early days of Tesla, every startup has to do things like this to survive. But Elon was different. He insisted on presenting a picture of Tesla as a highly profitable company, even when we weren't anywhere close to being financially stable. He was obsessed with keeping investors happy, and that led to some questionable decisions. I've seen financial documents that were altered or presented in a way that misrepresented the company's true financial status." The impact of Ford's words was immediate. The jury looked at each other, eyes wide. Some seemed to be scribbling notes frantically. Others exchanged glances, as if trying to process the enormity of what they were hearing. The room was thick with tension, and for a moment, Elon's heart sank. This was the type of testimony he feared. Ford had the knowledge, the inside information, to make his claims seem credible. And worse, he was now presenting them as a betrayal of Elon's core values. Ford was painting him as a man who was willing to deceive not just investors but the very people who had believed in him from the start. It was a direct attack on his integrity, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As Christine pushed Ford further, his testimony continued to unravel the story Elon had so carefully crafted. He described moments when Elon had instructed him to find creative ways to improve the company's financial standing, when the truth of the matter was far less flattering. I remember one instance, Ford continued, his voice unwavering, when Mr. Musk asked me to delay a report showing significant losses, opting to instead announce a smaller figure. This was done to prevent a drop in Tesla's stock price, which, at the time, was crucial to keeping investor confidence. It wasn't the only time this happened, but it was one of the most blatant. The words hit Elon like a punch to the gut. The image of the risk-taking innovator he had spent years building was now being shattered before his very eyes. The man on the stand wasn't the Elon Musk the public knew and admired, the man who had taken risks to build revolutionary companies. No, the image Ford was painting was of a man who had been willing to put everything, his reputation, his company, and the trust of those around him, at risk for the sake of one thing, survival. Elon's mind raced as Ford spoke. This wasn't the truth, at least not the whole truth. Yes, Tesla had struggled, and yes, he had made tough choices, but they were never about deceiving people. They were about keeping the dream alive. Keeping the mission alive. And no one, not even Jared or Ford, could take that away from him. With a deep breath, Elon stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. It was time to take control once more. He had to speak. He had to make them understand. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Elon stood up. His decision to take the stand in response to Ford's testimony wasn't something he had planned, but as the day wore on and the weight of the accusations mounted, he knew it was the only way to clear the air. Ford's words had struck a nerve, and he couldn't allow the jury to continue to hear a narrative that painted him as a villain, someone willing to deceive and manipulate for the sake of success. Elon's lead attorney, Mark Davis, shot him a questioning glance, as though urging him to reconsider. It was a risky move, and in the middle of a trial where things were already on a knife's edge, taking the stand could make or break everything. But Elon wasn't one to shy away from challenges, especially when it came to defending his integrity. He locked eyes with Mark and then looked toward Christine Blake, who was poised at her table, clearly prepared to continue her attack. The jury watched him closely as he made his decision. "I would like to take the stand, Your Honor," Elon said, his voice firm, projecting a sense of resolve that resonated through the room. Judge Richardson didn't hesitate. "Very well, Mr. Musk. Please proceed." Elon walked to the witness stand, every step measured, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The cool, sharp gaze of the jury followed him as he sat down. He could feel their eyes on him, weighing him, evaluating him, every ounce of their attention focused solely on him. Christine's eyes narrowed slightly, but her posture remained confident. She was ready to continue her cross-examination, but Elon wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of having the upper hand this time. After being sworn in, Elon took a deep breath and addressed the court. "I have always been transparent with my investors, my team, and my customers. I didn't build Tesla and SpaceX by lying or by cutting corners. I built them by making tough decisions, decisions that weren't always popular but were necessary to change the world." His voice rang with conviction, and he held the gaze of each jury member, making sure they understood his sincerity. Christine immediately jumped into action. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice laced with calculated precision, "you claim that you have always been transparent, but how do you respond to the allegations made by Mr. Ford? According to his testimony, you directed him to manipulate financial reports in order to present a rosier picture to investors. Do you deny this? Elon's jaw tightened, but he refused to show any sign of weakness. I don't deny that I made tough financial decisions, he replied, his tone unwavering. But I do deny that I ever intentionally misrepresented the financial health of Tesla or SpaceX. Every decision I made was in the interest of keeping these companies afloat. If you've been in the trenches like I have, you would understand that sometimes the only way to keep a company going is to make sacrifices that no one else would even consider. But that doesn't make them unethical. Christine pressed on. So, you're saying that Mr. Ford's testimony is false? That his claims about your involvement in altering financial reports are completely unfounded? Elon leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with hers. Christine, what Ford is suggesting is that I made decisions for the sake of optics, for the sake of keeping up appearances. That's not the truth. Yes, we delayed certain reports or shifted some timelines to manage expectations, but that wasn't about lying, it was about doing what was necessary to keep the business going. You can't build a company like Tesla without taking risks, and sometimes, those risks involve walking a fine line. But I never deceived anyone. I made decisions based on the information available at the time, and I did it to keep Tesla alive. Christine didn't back down. She was relentless, and the questions continued, each one probing deeper into Elon's decisions, his leadership style, and his ethics. But as the hours passed, Elon began to feel a shift in the room. The jury, initially skeptical, had begun to take a different view. Elon's calm and unwavering demeanor, his clarity in explaining the decisions he had made, and his passion for his companies were undeniable. Even Christine's sharp questions couldn't diminish the sincerity in his voice. At one point, Elon even found himself recounting some of the most difficult moments in Tesla's history, the near-bankrupt days when they were struggling to produce enough cars, when SpaceX was on the verge of failure after a series of catastrophic rocket failures. He told the jury about the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the moments when it seemed like failure was inevitable, but they pushed through it anyway. There were days when I didn't know if we would make it, Elon said, his voice softening for the first time. But I believed in what we were doing. I believed that if we didn't give up, if we kept pushing forward, we could change the world. And we did. Tesla, SpaceX, they're not just companies. They're the future. And I've sacrificed everything for that future. I've sacrificed time, money, relationships, but I've never sacrificed my integrity. The courtroom fell silent. The jury sat in rapt attention, their eyes never leaving Elon. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time since the trial began, it felt like they were beginning to see the person behind the headlines, the person who had fought against overwhelming odds not for personal gain, but for something far greater. Christine Blake, clearly aware that she was losing ground, pressed one last question. So you're asking this court to believe that despite all the evidence we've presented, despite all the allegations against you, you are completely innocent of any wrongdoing? Elon looked directly at the jury, his eyes steady and resolute. I am not asking anyone to believe in my innocence. I am asking you to believe in the truth. Yes, I've made mistakes. But my mistakes were always made with the goal of creating something that would make the world a better place. And I will continue to fight for that goal, no matter what anyone says. Christine's face tightened, and she gave a small nod. The exchange was over for now, and Elon felt a sense of relief wash over him. But he knew that this was only one battle in a much larger war. The fight wasn't over, but he was ready. And this time, he would do whatever it took to win. The day after Elon's testimony, a silence fell over the courtroom. The trial had reached a tipping point, and it was clear to everyone involved that the momentum had shifted. The weight of Elon's words, his calm resolve, and the vulnerability he had shown in the face of relentless cross-examination had left a significant impact. He could feel it in the air, there was a subtle change in the way the jury was looking at him, and even Christine Blake seemed momentarily thrown off course. But as with every battle, there was no time to rest. Elon had faced down one challenge, but the opposition was far from done. Christine, a formidable adversary, was sharpening her knives for the next strike, and she was not going to let up. The next few days were critical. The jury's trust in him was fragile, and he had to keep proving that his vision was never about deceit, it was always about survival and innovation. That morning, as Elon sat at the defense table reviewing his notes, he received an unexpected visitor. Mark Davis, his lead attorney, walked in with a look of grave concern on his face. "Elon," Mark began, his voice low, "there's something you need to see. You're not going to like it." Elon's heart skipped a beat. "What's happened?" Mark pulled up a series of images on his tablet and turned the screen toward Elon. The images were screenshots from a popular news outlet, one that had been covering the trial extensively. There, in stark contrast to the legal battle playing out in the courtroom, were side-by-side photos of Elon with some of the most powerful figures in Silicon Valley, images of him shaking hands with investors, rubbing elbows with influential business leaders, and attending galas and high-profile events. But it wasn't just the photos that caught Elon's attention. It was the headline. "Elon Musk's trial, is the man behind the vision a fraud?" The words were an arrow aimed straight at his heart. They painted him not as the visionary leader who had brought electric vehicles and space exploration to the forefront of human achievement, but as a man hiding behind a polished persona. The insinuation was clear, the face of innovation was a fraud, and now the truth was finally coming to light. Elon's pulse quickened as he scanned the article. Christine had gone on the offensive, and the media was running with it. They were twisting the narrative, turning his trial into a circus of accusations, rather than a search for justice. The accusations weren't new, but the media frenzy around them was. It was relentless. They were painting him as the villain in a story that was being told on their terms, and the public was eating it up. Mark watched him closely, waiting for a reaction. Elon's mind raced as he absorbed the implications. The trial was no longer just about legal arguments or courtroom drama, it had become a public spectacle. And in the court of public opinion, the truth was often the first casualty. "We need to address this," Elon said, his voice calm but laced with frustration. "We can't let this narrative take hold. It's not just about winning the case, it's about making sure the world understands what this trial is really about." Mark nodded. "I agree. But we need to be strategic. The media's portrayal of this case is going to impact the jury. They're already under immense pressure, and this only complicates things further." Elon's mind was already working through his options. "We have to go on the offensive, Mark. We can't just sit back and let them control the narrative. We need to hit them with the truth, our truth. We have to show the world that I didn't just take risks for myself, I took them for the future of humanity. It's bigger than me." Mark hesitated, but then his expression hardened with resolve. "I'll arrange a press conference. But we'll need to time it carefully. If we do this wrong, it could backfire. We need to make sure the message is clear, concise, and powerful." Elon nodded. He was no stranger to high-stakes situations, but this felt different. The clock was ticking, and every decision he made from here on out would have consequences, not just for his own future, but for the future of Tesla, SpaceX, and the vision he had spent his life building. Later that afternoon, the press conference was set. The media gathered in the sleek conference room, cameras flashing as reporters filed in. Elon stood behind a podium, his posture rigid and calm, his face a mask of determination. The weight of the situation settled around him like a cloak, but he knew this was his moment. He had to address the world, and he had to do it in a way that would resonate beyond the courtroom. As the reporters settled, Elon began, his voice cutting through the noise of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I stand before you not just as the CEO of Tesla or SpaceX, but as someone who has dedicated his life to pushing humanity forward. To building a future where sustainable energy and space exploration aren't just possibilities, they're realities. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. The recent trial I've been a part of has become a distraction from the real issues at hand. I have been accused of misrepresentation, of deceiving investors and the public. And while I understand the need to examine the decisions I made, I want to make one thing clear: every decision I made was in pursuit of something greater. Tesla didn't survive because I played it safe. SpaceX didn't succeed because we followed the rules. We succeeded because we dared to think differently, to take risks that others wouldn't take. Elon's gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of reporters, his voice growing more passionate. Yes, there were mistakes along the way. Yes, there were moments when the road ahead seemed impossible. But I've never lost sight of the bigger picture, the mission. The goal was never about profit. It was about creating something that would change the world. And that's exactly what we've done. Tesla has revolutionized the electric car industry, and SpaceX has made space exploration possible for generations to come. He took a deep breath, his expression unwavering. I will continue to fight for that mission, no matter the cost. Because the world needs us to push the boundaries. The world needs us to take risks. And that's why I stand here today, ready to face whatever comes next, to clear my name, and to ensure that our work continues, for the good of humanity. As he finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the room erupted in questions, reporters shouting over each other, but Elon didn't wait for the onslaught. He turned and left the stage, his purpose clear. The message had been delivered. Elon knew the battle wasn't over. The media's portrayal of him would continue, the trial would rage on, and the public would have their opinions. But for the first time in weeks, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He had taken control of the narrative. And with that, he knew that no matter what happened next, he was ready for whatever came his way. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind. The media coverage exploded, and for the first time since the trial began, the narrative shifted. Elon Musk was no longer just the defendant in a courtroom drama. He was a man on a mission, a visionary fighting not just for his companies but for the future of humanity. The press couldn't get enough of the story, and they were torn between painting him as a misunderstood genius or a dangerous risk-taker. Elon sat in his office at Tesla, staring out the large windows that overlooked the factory floor. It was late in the evening, and the hum of machinery below was a constant reminder of what he was fighting for. The night had fallen, but his mind was still racing. He hadn't felt this much weight on his shoulders in years. The world was watching. This trial, this battle, wasn't just about his reputation, it was about the future of his companies, the vision he had spent decades building, and the dreams of millions of people who believed in what he was doing. Elon, Mark's voice broke through his thoughts as he walked into the room. You need to see this. Elon turned to face his attorney. Mark's usually calm demeanor was now edged with concern. He tossed a tablet onto the desk, and Elon immediately noticed the headline that appeared on the screen. Musk's media play: Does the public support mean legal victory? The article dissected the impact of the press conference, framing Elon's bold move as a carefully crafted PR stunt designed to manipulate public opinion. The piece, written by a leading columnist, questioned the sincerity of his statements, suggesting that his media blitz was just another tactic in his arsenal to distract from the legal challenges he faced in the courtroom. Elon frowned. This is exactly what I was afraid of. They're going to twist everything I do. I knew this would happen. They can't just let me be honest. They have to make it into a game of manipulation. Mark looked troubled. The media's taking sides, and now the jury's going to be under even more pressure. It's a dangerous game. They're already skeptical about the impact of your testimony, and now this is only adding to the drama. Elon rubbed his temples, frustration mounting. This was never about playing games. It was about setting the record straight, showing people the truth. But now it feels like no matter what I do, it's all going to be twisted. Mark nodded. I know. But here's the thing, you've made a strong case. You've been transparent, you've shown vulnerability, and the jury seems to be listening. The issue now is maintaining that momentum. If we let the media dictate this trial, we lose. We need to stay focused on the legal battle, not the public narrative. Elon's eyes narrowed. That's easier said than done. The pressure is only going to increase from here. And there's still Ford's testimony to contend with. The defense we've built is strong, but one bad day in court, and all of it could come crashing down. Mark's expression softened. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. But remember, we've faced worse. Tesla was once laughed at, SpaceX was told it would fail. But we didn't back down. And we're not backing down now. Elon took a deep breath, looking out over the factory again, letting the hum of the machines ground him. The sound was a reminder of why he did this in the first place, the purpose that drove him. It wasn't about the media, the trial, or even the critics. It was about the future. The world needed to change, and he was going to make that happen, no matter the cost. I know, Elon said quietly, his voice resolute. Let's focus on what we control. We'll keep pushing forward. No distractions. Mark nodded and left the room, leaving Elon alone once again with his thoughts. The fight was far from over. And now, with the media stirring the pot, things were only going to get more complicated. The next day, the courtroom was tense, charged with an energy that came from weeks of back-and-forth testimony in media chaos. The jury entered, their faces unreadable, and the whispers that had circulated among the spectators faded into silence as Judge Richardson called the session to order. Elon sat at the defense table, his hands folded in front of him, his mind focused on the task at hand. Christine Blake wasted no time in resuming her cross-examination of the defense's key witness. Ford had already taken the stand, his testimony still echoing in Elon's mind, but now it was time to face him again. Christine turned toward the jury, her voice sharp. Mr. Musk claims that every decision he made was in the best interest of his companies, but let's take a closer look at the real reason behind those decisions. She turned toward the witness stand. Mr. Ford, you've testified that on multiple occasions, Mr. Musk personally instructed you to alter financial reports to ensure favorable results. Could you elaborate on how these instructions were given and whether they were directly tied to Musk's public persona? Ford, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly stiffened. Yes, Ms. Blake. Elon was very direct about the way he wanted the numbers to be presented. It wasn't just about the facts, it was about how the facts would be perceived. There were several instances where he told me to adjust the timeline for production numbers, specifically to reflect better forecasts. This was done to maintain the confidence of investors. Christine's eyes flicked to Elon, then back to Ford. And in your opinion, was this manipulation intended to deceive the public, investors, or both? Ford hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. It wasn't just about the public perception, it was about maintaining the financial health of the company. The idea was that if investors believed Tesla was on track, they would continue to provide funding. But, yes, it was a form of manipulation. Elon's heart skipped a beat as he listened to Ford's words. The accusation stung, but he refused to let it show on his face. He had been prepared for this. He had known that the prosecution would use Ford to cast doubt on his integrity. Christine turned back to Elon. So, Mr. Musk, what do you say to the claim that you intentionally misled investors to keep your stock price high? Elon leaned forward, his eyes unwavering. I say that's not true. What Ford is describing is the reality of running a business that is trying to change the world. The pressure is immense, and sometimes, decisions need to be made in real time to protect the long-term vision. I never lied to anyone. I did what was necessary to keep Tesla moving forward. The courtroom held its breath as Elon's words hung in the air. The tension was palpable, and the jury's eyes shifted between the two men. Christine Blake's smirk remained, but Elon knew that the battle was far from over. His resolve had been tested, but he wasn't going to let it break. The fight for his future, for his legacy, had only just begun. The day after Elon's passionate defense in court, the media storm had only intensified. The courtroom drama continued to captivate the public, with pundits and analysts on every network dissecting his every move, trying to predict how this trial would unfold. But the real battle was no longer in the courtroom alone, it was in the hearts and minds of the American people, and that was where the real pressure lay. As the trial proceeded, the cracks in Elon's carefully constructed armor started to show. The intensity of the cross-examinations had begun to wear on him. His usual unshakable focus was starting to waver. It was in the moments when the courtroom went silent that Elon felt it most, the weight of the world, the future of Tesla and SpaceX, all riding on the outcome of this case. It wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about everything he had built, the dreams that had kept him awake for so many years. Elon had become a symbol of innovation, a larger-than-life figure who defied the odds. But as Christine Blake's questions grew sharper, more pointed, he found himself questioning whether he could really defend everything, whether his decisions would always be seen through the lens of integrity. The public's fascination with his life had been intoxicating at times, but now it felt like a suffocating weight. What if they were right? What if he had made too many mistakes along the way? The courtroom was unusually quiet as Christine Blake stood, preparing for her next round of questioning. She had been relentless, casting doubt on Elon's credibility at every turn, pushing him to the brink with every sharp question. Elon was no stranger to pressure, but something about her strategy seemed different this time, it felt personal. She wasn't just attacking his business decisions, she was questioning his character, his very identity. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice cold, "you've told this court that your companies are driven by a larger purpose, that you've risked everything for the sake of innovation. But isn't it true that your public persona, your vision, has always been intertwined with your financial interests? Doesn't that mean that the decisions you made about Tesla and SpaceX were more about your own ambition than the future of humanity?" Elon stiffened. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment where he was forced to confront the truth behind his motivations. He could feel the eyes of the jury on him, waiting for him to crack. But he couldn't afford to waver. "No, Ms. Blake," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm of doubt inside him. "I've never made decisions based solely on ambition. I've made them because I believe that what we're doing will change the world. Tesla's mission isn't just about making cars, it's about creating a sustainable future. SpaceX isn't about sending rockets into space, it's about making life multiplanetary. These aren't just businesses, they're visions that require extraordinary risk. Yes, they've been hard, and yes, I've made mistakes. But they were never mistakes born of greed or ambition. They were born of purpose." Christine didn't let up. "But, Mr. Musk, there's no denying that you've profited immensely from these ventures. You've amassed a fortune while pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Some would argue that the very nature of your success creates an inherent conflict of interest. How can you claim to have acted purely out of altruism when your financial success has been directly tied to your public image?" Elon's jaw tightened. He had heard these arguments before, but they had never stung quite like this. Christine's words weren't just accusations, they were attacks on the very fabric of his character. It was as if she was trying to strip him of everything he had worked for, turning his greatest achievements into nothing more than a self-serving scheme. "I've built what I've built because I believe in a future that's better than the one we have today," he said, his voice growing more firm. "I've put everything on the line, not for profit, but for the greater good. Do you think I wanted to risk losing everything to make a few extra dollars? No. I risked everything because I wanted to show the world that change is possible. I've sacrificed countless hours, billions of dollars, and my own peace of mind for this cause. And I will continue to fight for it, no matter how much you or anyone else tries to tear it down." For a moment, the room was silent. Elon's words had hung in the air, a direct challenge to everything Christine had built up in her questioning. Even the jury seemed to shift in their seats, uncertain of what to make of his response. But Christine wasn't finished. "Mr. Musk, you're a brilliant man, and there's no denying that you've achieved things that others only dream of. But let's not forget that the very companies you've built are also under scrutiny for misleading investors, overstating production numbers, and making promises you couldn't keep. The public may see you as a visionary, but what happens when the facts don't match the image? What happens when your vision falls short?" Elon paused. The question lingered in the air, heavy with implications. The stakes had never been higher. He had faced countless obstacles throughout his life: Tesla's near bankruptcy, the faltering early days of SpaceX, the countless doubters who said he wouldn't make it. But those were obstacles he could overcome. This trial, however, was different. This was a battle for his legacy, for the reputation of the companies that had come to symbolize progress and change. He glanced at the jury, their eyes now full of doubt, uncertainty. It was clear that Christine's attack had landed. They were questioning him, and not just his decisions, but his very identity. What if the world really saw him as just another billionaire who played the game to suit his own needs? Elon took a deep breath, grounding himself in the mission once again. He wasn't here to make excuses. He was here to show the world what he had done and why it mattered. "I understand the skepticism," he said quietly, his voice gaining strength. "I do. But I also understand that sometimes, the road to progress is messy. It's filled with setbacks, failures, and missteps. But every single one of those failures has taught me something that I could use to make the next step better. If you want to question my motives, that's fine. But at the end of the day, the work speaks for itself. Tesla is revolutionizing the way we think about energy, and SpaceX is laying the groundwork for humanity to become a multiplanetary species. I've made mistakes, but I've never stopped trying to do the right thing." Elon's words were met with silence. For a moment, it felt like the courtroom had collectively exhaled, the weight of the conversation settling around them. Christine Blake opened her mouth to ask another question, but before she could speak, the judge intervened. "Ms. Blake, I think that's enough for today," Judge Richardson said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. I suggest we all take a moment to reflect on what's been said." As the courtroom began to clear, Elon stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made his stand, and for the first time in this trial, he felt like he had regained some of his footing. The battle wasn't over, but it had taken a turn. The cracks were still there, but now, they were his cracks to own. The fight for his future was far from finished. But Elon Musk was ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The morning after the intense exchange in court, Elon woke up to a world that seemed as uncertain as it had ever been. The sun was rising over the horizon, and the early light bathed his room in a soft glow. He stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. Last night's events were still playing over and over in his mind. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of vulnerability. Christine Blake had pushed him further than anyone ever had, questioning not just his actions, but the very foundation of everything he believed in. He had answered as best as he could, but it hadn't felt like enough. There was always something more, something that made him question whether he could truly make the world understand. He wasn't just defending his companies anymore, he was defending his vision, his life's work. Elon got out of bed, walked to the large windows, and looked out at the sprawling Tesla factory below. It was still early, but the hum of activity was already in the air. People were busy, their movements purposeful, focused on creating the future, just as he had envisioned. And then there was SpaceX, which, like Tesla, was often fighting an uphill battle against skepticism. But that was what he had always done, fight. He couldn't back down now. He had never walked away from a challenge, and this was no different. But the trial had started to chip away at something inside him. He wasn't just Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX anymore. He was a man facing a reckoning. The next day, as Elon entered the courtroom, he knew things were about to escalate. It was the last day of the defense's case, and the final witnesses were about to take the stand. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew this trial was reaching its climax, and the stakes had never been higher. Elon sat at the defense table, looking at the jury. They were attentive, their expressions guarded. He couldn't read them. Were they swayed by his testimony? Or had Christine Blake's cross-examination caused irreparable damage? The uncertainty was gnawing at him. He glanced over at Mark, who was leaning in, reviewing notes. "You good?" Mark asked in a low voice. Elon gave a small nod. "Let's just finish this." The judge entered, and the courtroom fell into an expectant silence. "The defense may proceed," Judge Richardson said, his voice firm. Mark stood up and addressed the court. "Your Honor, I'd like to call our final witness to the stand, Ms. Sarah Finch, an independent financial analyst who has been following Tesla and SpaceX for over a decade." As Sarah Finch took the stand, Elon felt a flicker of hope. Sarah was one of the few people who truly understood both the risks and rewards of what he was doing. She had been a supporter of Tesla and SpaceX for years and had written numerous reports detailing their potential. If anyone could shed light on the long-term vision behind Elon's actions, it was her. Mark introduced Sarah to the court, and she quickly began to outline her credentials and her deep knowledge of both Tesla and SpaceX. Elon listened intently as she spoke, her calm demeanor and clear expertise providing a stark contrast to the chaos of the trial. "Ms. Finch," Mark began, "can you please explain to the court your professional assessment of Mr. Musk's leadership and the decisions he made with regards to Tesla and SpaceX?" Sarah nodded confidently. "Of course. I've followed Mr. Musk's companies for years. Tesla and SpaceX are pioneers in their respective industries, and I believe they represent the future of energy and space exploration. What sets Mr. Musk apart is his ability to take enormous risks and make decisions that others might consider too bold. But those risks are calculated. He's not someone who operates blindly, he has a clear vision of what the world could be, and he's willing to sacrifice everything to achieve that." She continued, explaining how Elon's leadership style, though unconventional, had been instrumental in pushing the boundaries of technology and innovation. She emphasized that Tesla's struggles were not indicative of a flawed strategy, but rather a reflection of the challenges inherent in leading disruptive industries. The jury listened, and for the first time in days, Elon felt a sense of relief. Sarah's testimony was powerful. She painted a picture of a visionary leader, not a man blinded by greed or ambition. Her words helped reinforce the message he had been trying to convey all along, that his actions were not for personal gain, but for the greater good. After Sarah's testimony, the courtroom was given a brief recess. Elon stepped out into the hallway, his mind racing. It was hard to shake the feeling that, despite everything he had done, there was still more to prove. The trial wasn't over, and Christine Blake was already planning her rebuttal. He had no illusions that she would go easy on him. As he walked down the hallway, he noticed a familiar figure standing near the doors leading outside, Maya. She had been with him every step of the way throughout this trial, offering emotional support when he needed it most. Their relationship had been strained at times, particularly when the trial first began, but over the past few weeks, they had grown closer again. "Hey," Elon said quietly, stopping beside her. "How's it going?" Maya offered a weak smile. "It's going. You've been holding up well in there." Elon nodded, but the words didn't feel right. "I don't know if I'm holding up well, Maya. I'm doing everything I can, but I still feel like it's not enough. The public's perception of me, of everything I've done, it's all up in the air. What if I lose? What does that mean for the companies? For everything I've worked for?" Maya placed a hand on his arm, offering him a moment of calm. "You've done everything you can. You've been honest, and you've shown the world who you really are. That's more than most people ever do. Don't let this trial define you. The world already knows who you are." Elon looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. He couldn't control everything, especially how people would perceive him. But he could continue to push forward, to fight for the future he believed in. "I just don't want to let anyone down," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya squeezed his arm. "You've never let anyone down. Not really. You've changed the world." Elon took a deep breath. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a while, he felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, but he was ready to face whatever came next. It wasn't just about the trial anymore. It was about the future. And Elon Musk would fight for that future, no matter what. The days following Sarah Finch's testimony were filled with a quiet tension. Elon had a brief sense of hope that, perhaps, the jury might finally be swayed in his favor. But as the trial dragged on, he knew better than to get too comfortable. The stakes had been raised, and Christine Blake had never been more determined. The court was filled with anticipation as the final round of arguments approached. Elon could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had spent so much of his life building Tesla and SpaceX, navigating through every challenge with single-minded determination, but now he found himself in a place where every word he spoke, every decision he made, could tip the scale in the balance between redemption and destruction. It was the morning of the closing arguments, and the courtroom felt different. The air was thick with uncertainty. Today would be the final opportunity for both sides to make their case before the jury deliberated. Elon walked in and took his seat, his mind racing. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but all he could think about were the consequences. What would happen if he lost? "Mr. Musk, are you ready?" Mark asked as he glanced over at him. Mark had been his rock throughout this process, but even he was starting to feel the pressure of the situation. Elon gave a small nod. "Ready as I'll ever be." Christine Blake was the first to present her closing argument. She stood tall, her demeanor calm and composed as she addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we've seen here over the past several weeks is a pattern of deception, a web of lies spun by a man who has built his empire on the backs of investors and consumers alike. Mr. Musk's promises of revolutionizing the world with electric vehicles and space exploration are not grounded in truth, they are fantasies designed to fuel his personal ambition." She paced slowly in front of the jury, her voice cold and calculated. "We've shown that Mr. Musk made false statements to investors, misstated production numbers, and used the media to manipulate public opinion in his favor. The companies he's built are built on hype, not reality. And now, you must ask yourselves, how much longer can we let this man, who has deceived the very people who put their trust in him, continue his reign unchecked?" Elon felt his pulse quicken. She was twisting everything he had worked for, turning it into something dark and malicious. It was difficult to sit still, to hold back the urge to stand up and yell at her. But he knew he couldn't. He had to stay composed. The future of everything depended on it. Christine's voice softened as she reached the end of her argument. "This case is not just about the numbers. It's about the trust we place in our leaders. It's about the integrity of the people who stand at the helm of companies that affect millions of lives. Mr. Musk's track record has shown that his only true priority is himself. He does not deserve your trust." With that, Christine turned and returned to her seat, her gaze fixed firmly on the jury, as if daring them to challenge her words. The courtroom was silent as the weight of her argument hung in the air. Then it was Mark's turn. He rose from his seat, walked to the center of the courtroom, and turned to the jury. He exhaled slowly, gathering his thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady but urgent. "The prosecution has presented you with a story, one where Mr. Musk is painted as a villain. But let's look at the facts." He walked over to the table, picking up a few papers. What you've heard throughout this trial is that Mr. Musk has made bold promises, that he's taken huge risks in the face of impossible odds. And you've heard that sometimes those risks haven't paid off immediately. But the thing is, these risks were never about making money. They were about creating something better. Something revolutionary. Mark paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. Mr. Musk didn't create Tesla to make millions of dollars, though he certainly earned his share. He didn't create SpaceX to become the richest man on Earth. He created these companies because he believes in the future. He believes in sustainable energy, in reducing humanity's dependence on fossil fuels, in making life multiplanetary. Those are not just lofty ideas, they are the foundation of everything he's built. Mark turned to the jury, his gaze intense. The truth is, Mr. Musk has taken on challenges that no one else would dare face. And yes, there have been moments of failure. But that is the price of innovation. It's messy. It's unpredictable. And in the case of Tesla, it's been a near impossible road to navigate. But the company is succeeding now because Mr. Musk has always been willing to push forward, to risk everything, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. He paused and took a deep breath. The prosecution would have you believe that Mr. Musk's vision was some sort of grand, manipulative scheme. But I ask you, is that really the case? Is it manipulation to believe in something bigger than yourself? To take risks because you see a future that others can't even imagine? No. That is vision. That is leadership. Mark glanced back at Elon, who was watching him closely. Elon could see the sincerity in Mark's eyes. He wasn't just defending him as a client. He was defending the idea of what Elon represented. And that meant everything to him. Mark finished his closing statement with one final thought: this trial isn't just about whether Mr. Musk made mistakes. It's about whether the world should be afraid of the future. It's about whether we should allow fear to dictate how we view those who are daring enough to try to change it. Mr. Musk has done more for humanity than any of us could dream. And in the end, we should be applauding him, not condemning him. As Mark returned to his seat, Elon's heart raced. The final argument had been made, and now all they could do was wait for the jury's decision. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as the judge called for a recess before deliberations began. Elon stood up, his mind spinning. The moment of truth was almost here. He walked out of the courtroom, feeling a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. It had been a long road to get here, but no matter what happened next, he knew one thing: he had done everything he could. The future was now in the hands of 12 strangers. Elon stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, his hands pressed against the cool marble wall. His breath came in shallow bursts. The trial had been grueling, and now, it was out of his hands. The jury had retreated to deliberate, and there was nothing left to do but wait. But the waiting was agonizing. He had no idea how long the deliberations would take, and each passing minute felt like an eternity. His thoughts swirled like a storm. He had fought so hard, given everything he had. The testimony. The witnesses. His own defense. He had bared his soul to the court, trying to explain the truth of his actions, the sacrifices he had made for his companies and the future of humanity. But Christine Blake had been relentless. Every argument she had presented had chipped away at him, turning the court into a battleground of wits and wills. She had painted him as a man consumed by ambition, blinded by greed. Would the jury see through that? Or would they believe her narrative? "Mr. Musk," a voice called, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Mark, walking toward him with a look of cautious optimism. "How are you holding up?" Elon didn't respond immediately. He just stared at the floor, trying to steady his thoughts. He wanted to say something, anything, to reassure himself. But the words didn't come. Mark noticed the tension in Elon's posture. "It's almost over," he said quietly. "You've done everything you could. Whatever happens next, you've built something that can't be taken away. The future is already here. Elon glanced up at him, feeling a brief flicker of appreciation. Mark had been right by his side every step of the way, offering support when things got rough. And now, with everything hanging in the balance, his words were a small anchor in the storm. I don't know, Mark, Elon said, his voice low. What if it's not enough? What if the jury doesn't understand? I've put my heart and soul into this. And now I'm just waiting. For something that could change everything. Mark placed a hand on Elon's shoulder, giving him a firm squeeze. You can't control what they think, but you've given them the truth. You've shown them who you are. And I know that the world will see it too, no matter what happens here. Elon nodded, though the doubt still gnawed at him. They both fell silent as the minutes dragged on. He could hear the soft murmur of voices in the distance, perhaps the jury, still deep in discussion. Time felt like it was moving in slow motion, and with each passing moment, the weight of the trial seemed to press down harder. Hours passed before the doors to the courtroom opened again, and the jury filed back in. Elon stood up instinctively, his heart pounding in his chest. He caught a glimpse of Christine Blake, who sat with a calculated expression on her face, as if she knew exactly how things were going to turn out. But Elon couldn't read the jury. They were all blank-faced, their expressions unreadable. The judge nodded at the jury foreman. Have you reached a verdict? He asked. The foreman stood, his voice clear and steady. We have, Your Honor. The courtroom held its breath as the foreman walked forward and handed the verdict to the judge. The judge scanned the document briefly before looking up at the room. In the case of the United States versus Elon Musk, the jury has reached a unanimous decision. Mr. Musk, please stand. Elon's knees felt weak as he stood. His mind raced, he could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. This was it. The moment that would determine the rest of his life. The judge looked at the jury, his expression serious. Members of the jury, what is your verdict? The foreman cleared his throat and spoke in a measured tone. We find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty on all counts. A wave of emotion washed over Elon. For a brief moment, he couldn't even process the words. He had been expecting something, anything, but the release that came with those words was overwhelming. Not guilty. It felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders, a weight he hadn't even realized he had been carrying until it was gone. The courtroom erupted into whispers. The tension that had hung in the air for weeks evaporated in an instant. Christine Blake's face was hard to read, but there was no mistaking the flicker of frustration in her eyes. She had fought so hard, but in the end, her strategy had fallen short. Elon turned to Mark, who was smiling with a sense of relief. We did it, Mark said, his voice filled with disbelief. We won. For a moment, Elon couldn't even speak. He was still processing the verdict, still coming to terms with the fact that he was free. His life, his work, his future, they were all intact. But as the reality set in, a deep sense of gratitude filled him. Gratitude for his team, for his supporters, for those who had believed in him when the world had doubted. Gratitude for his companies, for the people who were working tirelessly to change the world. And most of all, gratitude for the chance to continue his mission. The judge's voice cut through the quiet. Mr. Musk, you are free to go. The court is adjourned. The outside world greeted him with a sense of finality. The press had gathered outside the courthouse, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrust forward. But Elon wasn't in the mood to entertain them. He didn't need their validation. He had already won something far more important, the chance to keep building, to keep pushing the limits of what was possible. Maya, he said, turning to her as she stepped forward from the crowd. She had been with him throughout the trial, offering support when he needed it most. She smiled at him, her eyes filled with relief. You did it. Elon nodded slowly. Yeah, we did. But there's still more to do. The fight isn't over yet. Maya reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. You've got this, Elon. Whatever comes next, you've already proven what you're capable of. The world is watching, and you're ready. As they stood there together, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, but he was no longer burdened by the weight of the trial. He had been given a second chance, a chance to continue his mission, to build a future that others thought was impossible. And he wasn't going to waste it. The days following the verdict were a blur for Elon. The media frenzy had reached a fever pitch, with reporters clamoring for his attention. Cameras flashed wherever he went, and news outlets raced to cover every angle of the trial's outcome. Some hailed it as a victory for innovation, while others were skeptical, questioning whether the legal battle would impact Tesla or SpaceX's future. But for Elon, the verdict was just the beginning. He knew that the world would not let him rest, not for a moment. The triumph in the courtroom was still fresh, but his mind was already focused on the next steps. He had a company to run, a vision to realize, and a future to build. There was no time to celebrate. His first stop was Tesla's headquarters. He had barely set foot in the office since the trial started, and now he felt the weight of his responsibilities as CEO more than ever. As he walked through the glass doors of the building, he was greeted by a small group of engineers and executives. They clapped politely, but Elon could tell that they, like him, were eager to get back to work. "Welcome back, Elon," said Emma, Tesla's lead engineer. "We've got a lot to catch up on." Elon smiled, though it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. "Let's get to it," he said, his voice steady, though internally, he felt a rush of anxiety. The world had been watching every move during the trial, but now they would watch even more closely to see what happened next. He sat down in his office, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. His thoughts drifted to his children. He had spent so little time with them during the trial, and the guilt gnawed at him. They were his reason for everything he did. The late nights. The risks. The sleepless hours working to make the impossible possible. It was all for them, for a better future. But there was no time for regrets now. The business needed him, and the world was looking to Tesla to continue its journey toward sustainable energy. It was more than just a company. It was a movement, and Elon was at its helm. But as he sat in his office, staring at the news reports of the trial, a new fear crept into his mind. What if this had all been for nothing? What if the road ahead would only get harder? The next few days were filled with meetings and strategy sessions. Elon was back to his routine, endless discussions with engineers, designers, and executives about new products and upcoming projects. Tesla's production numbers were improving, but there were still challenges ahead. Elon knew better than anyone that success wasn't guaranteed, no matter how much he pushed the envelope. The road to full electric adoption was still long and fraught with obstacles. In the midst of these discussions, a surprise meeting was called, one that would shift the direction of his focus completely. It was a meeting with NASA. Elon walked into the conference room, surprised to find a few familiar faces waiting for him. Among them was Robert, a high-ranking official at NASA whom he had met during the early days of SpaceX. Robert had been a key supporter of SpaceX's ambitions to launch missions to Mars. But now, there was something new on the table. Something that would change everything. "Good to see you, Elon," Robert said, offering a handshake. "We've been following the trial closely, but now it's time to talk business." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Business? What's this about?" Robert glanced around the room, ensuring the conversation was private. "We've been thinking about the next big leap in space exploration. And we need you. SpaceX has the expertise, the technology, and the vision to take humanity further than we ever thought possible. We want to work together on the next phase of the Mars mission." Elon sat up straight, the words hitting him like a sudden burst of energy. He had always believed that humanity's future was on Mars, but now, he was being asked to partner with NASA on a project of unprecedented scale. This wasn't just about launching rockets, this was about putting the first humans on Mars. "What are we talking about, exactly?" Elon asked, his voice steady but eager. "We're talking about a long-term collaboration. A joint effort between NASA and SpaceX to build the infrastructure for a manned mission to Mars. We're talking about building habitats, developing life support systems, and ultimately getting astronauts on the Red Planet. NASA's budget and expertise combined with SpaceX's technology could make this happen faster than anyone imagines." Elon felt a surge of excitement. He had spent years pushing the boundaries of space travel with SpaceX, but this was different. This was the dream, the very reason he had started the company. To make life multiplanetary. Now, it was within his grasp. "This is exactly what I've been waiting for," Elon said, his voice filled with conviction. "We've got the Falcon Heavy, and we're getting closer to the Starship prototype. But we need more than just rockets. We need a full-scale effort, resources, talent, and technology. And most importantly, we need to keep pushing the limits. This is bigger than anything we've done before." Robert smiled, clearly pleased with Elon's response. "That's exactly what we need. We're ready to move forward, but we'll need your help to turn this vision into a reality." Elon's mind raced. He had always known that space exploration was the next frontier, but now, it wasn't just about SpaceX. It was about humanity as a whole. This was their chance to become a multiplanetary species, to secure a future that could survive beyond the Earth. "We're in," Elon said, his voice resolute. "Let's make it happen." As the meeting came to a close, Elon walked out of the room, his mind buzzing with possibilities. This was what he had dreamed of. The legal battle was over. The courtroom drama was behind him. But now, the real work began. He needed to get back to SpaceX, to rally the team. They had a new mission, to make Mars a reality. There would be challenges, of course, technical hurdles, financial obstacles, and the ever-present specter of failure. But Elon was no stranger to failure. He had failed time and time again, only to rise stronger each time. This time would be no different. As he stepped into the elevator, heading toward the SpaceX floor, he couldn't help but think back to the trial. It had been a crucible, but it had forged something stronger within him. A sense of purpose that was clearer than ever. The world had doubted him. But now, he would prove them wrong. Elon's mind was racing as he sat in the boardroom at SpaceX headquarters. The new partnership with NASA had ignited something within him, a renewed sense of purpose. The trial had been a test of endurance, but this was the challenge he had been waiting for. Manned missions to Mars. A permanent human presence on another planet. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for. But it wasn't going to be easy. Elon stood up from his chair, his gaze sweeping over the team of engineers, scientists, and project leads gathered around the table. He had seen their faces before, but now, there was an urgency in the air that hadn't been there before. This wasn't just another mission, this was the future of humanity. "We have a new directive," Elon began, his voice steady but filled with an unmistakable passion. "We are no longer just a private space company. We are the key to humanity's future. SpaceX, in partnership with NASA, is going to make Mars a reality. And it's going to be up to all of us to make sure it happens. No excuses. No shortcuts." He paused, letting his words sink in. The team was listening intently, hanging on every word. Elon could feel the weight of their attention, the same way he had felt the weight of the courtroom just weeks ago. This was the real test, the one that mattered most. But this time, there were no lawyers, no media spinning the narrative. It was just the team and him, and the mission. "We're going to need the best of the best," Elon continued. "We need engineers who think outside the box. We need innovative solutions, not the same old, same old. We have to rethink what's possible. We're going to build the starship, the vessel that will carry humans to Mars, and we're going to do it faster and better than anyone thought possible." There was a murmur of agreement from the room. The engineers nodded, their eyes lighting up with the challenge ahead. Elon could see it, the same spark he had seen in them when they launched the first Falcon Heavy, when they landed the first reusable rocket. They were ready. And he was ready to push them further than ever before. The next few months were a blur of intense work. Elon and the team at SpaceX worked tirelessly, pushing the boundaries of what they thought was possible. The Starship prototype was coming together, piece by piece. They had already made tremendous strides in developing the spacecraft, but now it was time to push it even further. They had to ensure it could withstand the harsh conditions of space and the unforgiving atmosphere of Mars. But it wasn't just about the spacecraft. There were countless other hurdles to overcome: life support systems, habitat construction, sustainable power sources. They had to think beyond the rocket and focus on creating an entire ecosystem that could support human life on Mars. It was a monumental task, but Elon had never been one to shy away from the impossible. One evening, as Elon sat in the control room, watching engineers fine-tune the latest Starship prototype, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Maya. "We need to talk. Can we meet later tonight?" Elon's stomach tightened. It wasn't unusual for Maya to message him about work-related matters, but this felt different. He stared at the screen for a moment before typing a quick response. "Of course. I'll be in the office for a while, but we can meet afterward. See you then." He set his phone down, his mind immediately turning back to the work at hand. But something gnawed at him. Maya had been distant lately. Since the trial, things hadn't been the same between them. He had been consumed by the aftermath of the courtroom drama and the rush of getting back to work, and Maya had been consumed by her own responsibilities. The weight of their separate worlds seemed to be pulling them apart. But they had always found their way back to each other before, and he was determined to make sure that would happen again. Later that evening, Elon walked into the small cafe where he had arranged to meet Maya. She was sitting at a table by the window, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a street lamp outside. When she saw him, she smiled, but it was a reserved smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. He slid into the seat across from her. "What's going on, Maya?" he asked, his voice gentle but laced with concern. "You've been distant lately." Maya sighed, taking a long sip of her coffee before setting the cup down. "I know. I've been caught up with a lot of things. The trial, your schedule, everything. I feel like we've both been running in different directions." Elon studied her face, the lines of stress around her eyes more pronounced than usual. "Is it just the trial? Or is something else going on?" Maya looked away for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "It's not just the trial, Elon. It's you. You're always working, always pushing. And I get it. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to change the world. But in the process, I think you've forgotten about the people who are closest to you." Elon felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on his work, on the mission to reach Mars, that he had neglected the most important people in his life. Maya. His children. His friends. He had built companies, changed industries, and taken humanity to the edge of space, but in the process, he had lost sight of the simple things. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You're right. I've been so focused on the bigger picture that I've lost track of the smaller things. I never wanted to push you away. I thought I was doing the right thing." Maya shook her head, her eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and sadness. "I know you think it's all for the greater good, but I need you here, too. We all need you. And right now, it feels like you're slipping away." Elon reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I haven't forgotten about you, Maya. I promise you. But I also can't ignore the mission. The world needs this. Mars needs this. But I don't want to lose you in the process. Maya's expression softened, but the pain in her eyes remained. You can't change the world without the people you care about. And if you keep pushing us away, you won't have anyone left to help you when you get there. Elon's heart tightened. He knew she was right. He had always believed that the future was worth the sacrifice, but now, he understood that without the people he loved by his side, that future wouldn't mean anything. I'll do better, he said quietly. I'll make it right. For us. As they sat there, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air, Elon knew that the road ahead wouldn't just be about rockets, or space, or Mars. It would also be about balance. Finding a way to build the future without losing the present. He had learned many lessons over the years, but this was the one that mattered most. For the first time in a long while, he felt the full weight of the choices he had made. But he also felt something else, a new sense of clarity. The future wasn't just about getting to Mars. It was about getting there with the people who mattered most. And he wasn't going to let them slip away. In the days that followed his conversation with Maya, Elon's focus began to shift. The reality of their relationship, and the personal sacrifices he had made in the name of his work, had become clearer than ever. But despite the emotional weight, Elon knew he couldn't afford to slow down now. SpaceX's mission to Mars was not just a personal ambition, it was a vision that, if successful, would alter the trajectory of humanity forever. He would have to find a way to balance it all, to keep his eyes on the stars while grounding himself in the life he'd built here on Earth. The following morning, Elon arrived at SpaceX's headquarters with a renewed sense of purpose. His first stop was the Starship development floor, where engineers were tirelessly working on the next iteration of the spacecraft. It was a colossal project that had to meet the demands of space travel beyond what was previously thought possible. Elon had always pushed his teams to the limit, but now, there was a more personal drive behind every decision. "Morning, Elon," said Sophia, a lead engineer who had been with SpaceX since the early days of the Falcon program. "We've got updates on the thermal protection system for the Starship. We've got a new alloy material that could withstand the extreme temperatures of re-entry into Mars' atmosphere." Elon nodded, his interest piqued. "Show me." Sophia led him to a display of the new material. It shimmered under the harsh lights, a flexible, metallic substance that appeared light but strong. "We believe this material will significantly reduce heat buildup during re-entry," Sophia explained. "It's still in testing, but we're getting promising results. We'll need to finalize the durability tests before we can incorporate it into the final design." Elon took a moment to run his fingers along the surface of the sample, feeling the weight of its potential. Every challenge that SpaceX had overcome had been a step toward making Mars habitable. But now, it was no longer about proving the concept of space travel. It was about creating a world beyond Earth, a place where human life could thrive, not just survive. "This is incredible," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Keep pushing forward. The timeline to launch isn't going to get any easier, but this is the kind of innovation we need." Back in his office later that afternoon, Elon found himself distracted. His thoughts kept drifting to Maya and the conversation they'd had. He knew he needed to make more time for her, but the demands of the Mars mission were only intensifying. The Starship was nearly ready for its first orbital test flight, and NASA's team was already working alongside SpaceX engineers to refine the plans for Mars habitats. But if there was one thing Elon had learned from his past, it was that the key to success wasn't just in pushing forward, it was in having the right people beside you. Elon fired up his laptop and opened his calendar, scrolling through the upcoming week. It was packed: meetings with NASA, internal project updates, and planning sessions for the Mars mission. But at the bottom of the page, he penciled in a small block of time. Dinner with Maya. It was a small gesture, but to him, it felt significant. He had to make it work. No matter how busy he was, he couldn't afford to let the people he cared about slip away. He would figure out how to balance it all. Later that evening, after another long day at SpaceX, Elon drove across town to meet Maya at a quiet restaurant they used to frequent. It was one of those places where they could escape the constant noise of their lives and reconnect. As he walked through the door, he spotted Maya at their usual table by the window. She looked up as he approached, and her smile, though soft, seemed genuine this time. "Hi," she greeted him, standing up to embrace him. "How was your day?" Elon sat down across from her, taking a deep breath. "Busy as usual. But I made sure to clear time for tonight." Maya's eyes softened. "I'm glad. I've missed this." "Me too," Elon admitted. "I've been so consumed with work lately that I've let everything else slide. But I don't want to keep doing that. Not with you. Not with the people I care about." Maya smiled, the weight of the conversation that had weighed on her earlier now easing. "It's hard, isn't it? Finding that balance. But I think you can do it. We just have to make it a priority." Elon nodded. "I'm going to do better. I want to be here. For you. For us." The rest of the dinner passed more easily than either of them expected. They talked about their hopes for the future, Maya's work, Elon's vision for Mars, and even laughed about the small things that had once felt insignificant. For a brief moment, the weight of their respective worlds seemed to disappear. They were simply two people, sharing a meal, talking about the future. Afterward, as Elon drove Maya home, he felt a renewed sense of clarity. He knew there would be more difficult conversations ahead, but tonight had reminded him of something important. No matter how much he wanted to push the limits of technology in space exploration, the real meaning of success came from the people he was closest to. And he was determined to keep them close. As Maya got out of the car and waved him off, Elon drove away, the city lights blurring around him. His thoughts turned back to SpaceX, to the upcoming Mars mission, and to everything that still needed to be done. The stakes were higher than ever. But he wasn't facing them alone. And maybe, just maybe, that made all the difference. The following morning, Elon gathered with the SpaceX leadership team to discuss the final preparations for the Starship's orbital test flight. They were on the cusp of something extraordinary, a milestone that could change the course of history. Yet, as much as the excitement surged through the room, Elon couldn't shake the thought that had been creeping into his mind for days: this wasn't just about rockets. This was about creating a new world. "Everyone, we're about to take humanity's first real step toward becoming a multiplanetary species," Elon said, standing at the head of the table, his voice steady but filled with intensity. "This isn't just about building the best spacecraft. It's about something bigger. This is our chance to secure humanity's future. And we can't afford to fail." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed his words. The mission was no longer just about SpaceX. It was about humanity as a whole. Elon's mind flashed back to the courtroom, when everything had been on the line. He had fought tooth and nail to protect his vision, his companies, and his future. Now, more than ever, he knew that vision was worth fighting for. It was time to take the next step. The weeks flew by, and as the Starship's final orbital test flight approached, the tension in the air at SpaceX was palpable. The engineering team worked around the clock, making final adjustments to the spacecraft. Test pilots ran simulations, refining every maneuver to perfection. Elon stood at the helm of it all, his mind always in motion, constantly solving problems, refining designs, and pushing for perfection. But even as he looked toward the sky, his thoughts were never far from the ground. He had made a promise to Maya, and to himself, that he would find a way to balance his work with his personal life. It wasn't easy. Between the trial's aftermath, the public scrutiny, and the constant media buzz surrounding his Mars mission, time had become his most precious resource. But he kept his promise. Dinner with Maya had become a regular occurrence. They spent time together whenever possible, even if it meant squeezing moments into a jam-packed schedule. It was a small, but important change. As the Starship's test flight loomed, Elon found himself at the launch pad, overlooking the vast structure of the spacecraft. The familiar hum of the engines, the whirring of machinery, and the buzz of activity all around him filled the air. He could feel the energy, the excitement, the anticipation. This wasn't just another milestone for SpaceX. This was history in the making. "Everything's looking good, Elon," said John, one of the lead engineers, coming up to him with a clipboard. "The Starship is primed. The launch window opens in 2 hours. We're on track." Elon nodded, his gaze fixed on the spacecraft. "We've worked for this moment. Now, let's make sure everything goes as planned. We can't afford to miss anything." John gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. We've got it under control." But as the countdown to launch continued, Elon's mind drifted back to the early days of SpaceX. The countless setbacks. The failures. The endless questions about whether it was all possible. So many people had doubted him, told him that his vision was too ambitious, too unrealistic. And yet, here they were. On the verge of launching the most advanced spacecraft humanity had ever seen. Elon took a deep breath, pushing aside the memories. There was no time for nostalgia. They were about to do something that no one had ever done before. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of NASA, the anticipation was equally high. The collaboration between NASA and SpaceX had created a new synergy in the space industry. The future of space exploration was no longer just a matter of government initiatives, it was now a partnership between public and private sectors, a partnership that Elon had helped forge. Maya sat in her office, watching the live feed of the Starship launch preparations. She had become accustomed to the thrill of watching Elon push the boundaries of what was possible, but today felt different. Today, the world was going to see SpaceX and NASA take the next monumental step together. She had to admit, there was a part of her that still found it hard to believe how far Elon had come. From the courtroom drama that had threatened to unravel everything to the dream of colonizing Mars, he had persevered through it all. And now, as she watched the countdown, she couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and awe. Elon had always been driven by something larger than himself. But Maya knew that his drive wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey. And the people who walked with him. The final 10 minutes of the countdown passed in a blur of motion. Engineers double-checked every system, technicians ensured that the Starship systems were functioning perfectly, and the ground crew ran through final procedures. Elon stood with his arms crossed, his gaze never leaving the massive spacecraft. His mind was clear, focused, and unwavering. But even so, there was a part of him that couldn't help but feel the weight of what was at stake. If this launch was successful, it would pave the way for the first manned mission to Mars. It would be the realization of decades of hard work, failure, and sacrifice. But if it failed? Elon didn't let himself finish the thought. He had come too far, and there was no turning back now. As the final seconds ticked down, Elon's heart raced in his chest. He could feel the heat of the engines building as they prepared for ignition. The ground beneath him seemed to vibrate with the power that would soon propel the Starship into the heavens. Then, the countdown reached 0. 3, 2, 1, liftoff. The roar of the engines shook the ground as the Starship shot up into the sky, its sleek form ascending rapidly. Elon stood, watching the spacecraft vanish into the clouds, a trail of fire and smoke marking its path. For a few moments, he could only watch, his mind blank, his heart pounding in his chest. But as the Starship climbed higher, breaking through the atmosphere and into space, a sense of relief washed over him. It was working. It was really happening. Back at NASA, Maya watched the same feed with bated breath. The entire room was silent, all eyes glued to the monitors. The team around her had been working tirelessly to support SpaceX's mission, and now, they were all watching history unfold. Elon's face flashed on the screen as part of the live feed from the launch site. She could see the quiet determination in his expression, the same one she had always admired. The starship was off to a successful start. The first step had been taken, and it was one giant leap for mankind. But as much as Maya wanted to cheer, there was a nagging thought in the back of her mind. The mission was far from over. The real work was just beginning. Back at SpaceX headquarters, the celebrations began. The team erupted in cheers as the starship successfully entered orbit, completing its first test flight. It was a monumental achievement, but Elon couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the end of something, it was just the beginning. He turned to John, who stood beside him, a proud grin on his face. "This is just the start. We've got a long road ahead." John nodded, but his expression was filled with excitement. "We're one step closer to Mars, Elon. And we couldn't have done it without you." Elon smiled, but his mind was already shifting back to the bigger picture. The real challenge lay ahead. The next phase of the mission would be even more complex, more dangerous. They had proven they could build the ship. Now, they had to prove they could send it to Mars, and keep it there. But for the first time in a long while, Elon felt the weight of his work shift. It wasn't just about technology, or Mars, or rockets. It was about the people who believed in him, and the people who stood by his side. With them, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. As the crowd cheered, Elon turned and walked away, his eyes already focused on the stars once more. The journey had just begun. The successful test flight of the starship sent ripples through the aerospace community. Media outlets hailed the achievement, and SpaceX's stock prices soared to new heights. The celebration was well-earned, but Elon Musk wasn't one to rest on his laurels. He was already thinking about the next steps, the next hurdles to overcome, and the next innovations to create. The first test flight was only a small part of the bigger picture. The true challenge was the upcoming mission to Mars. Elon's vision was clear: humans on Mars. But the road to get there was full of unforeseen challenges that even he couldn't predict. As the starship successfully entered orbit, it was clear that even greater obstacles lay ahead. Back at SpaceX, Elon gathered his leadership team in the conference room for an urgent meeting. The team was buzzing with excitement, but Elon knew that this was the calm before the storm. He stood at the front of the room, his expression as serious as ever. "We've proven we can get to space," Elon began, his voice steady. "But this is just the beginning. Getting to Mars is a different beast entirely. We have to think bigger. Think further. There are issues we haven't even encountered yet." He paced slowly, the weight of his words sinking into the team. "The spacecraft itself is one thing, but we need to make sure that every aspect of the mission is ready. From life support systems to fuel sustainability, to creating a habitable environment on Mars itself, we need to push every boundary. And we need to do it fast." Sarah, one of the senior engineers, raised her hand. "We've been working on a sustainable life support system for the crew. The current model is functional, but it still needs refinement for long-term use. We're testing it now, but there's no room for error. One malfunction could cost lives." Elon nodded. "I know. Every detail counts." There were murmurs of agreement around the room. Elon paused, letting the gravity of the situation settle over them. "The biggest issue," he continued, "is the psychological and physical toll this journey will take on the crew. A one-way trip to Mars means months of isolation. That's a lot of time for the human mind to deal with. We need to figure out how to mitigate that. We can't afford to lose anyone mentally or emotionally." Maya's face flashed into Elon's mind. She had been a constant support for him through all of this, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been neglecting her. As much as he wanted to push forward with the Mars mission, he knew he couldn't ignore the human element of the equation. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah spoke again, pulling him back into the conversation. "We've also been researching ways to provide regular communication with Earth, but there's a delay of up to 20 minutes each way. That means no real-time communication with mission control. It's going to feel like they're truly on their own." Elon's gaze hardened. He had always known that the emotional challenges of the mission would be immense, but hearing it articulated so bluntly was a stark reminder of just how much was at stake. "We'll figure it out," Elon said, his voice full of determination. "This is a challenge, yes, but it's one we've been preparing for. Our mission isn't just about getting to Mars. It's about surviving there and creating a future for humanity." Later that evening, after a long day of meetings, Elon sat in his office, staring at the endless list of tasks that awaited him. The mental exhaustion was starting to set in, but he refused to slow down. The clock was ticking, and every day that passed brought them one step closer to Mars. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Maya. "Are you free tonight? I'd love to see you." Elon felt a small smile tug at the corner of his lips. He had promised to make time for her, and he intended to keep that promise. He quickly typed a response. "I'm free in about an hour. Dinner?" The reply came almost instantly. "Perfect. I'll meet you at the usual place." Elon stood up from his desk, stretching his stiff muscles. He was used to long days, but tonight felt different. He hadn't realized how much he needed this time with Maya. The whirlwind of work and responsibilities had drowned out the personal side of his life, and he was beginning to feel the strain. When he arrived at the restaurant, he found Maya waiting at their usual table. She looked up and smiled warmly as he approached. The tension in his chest seemed to ease, and for the first time in a while, Elon felt like he could breathe. "Hey," he said, taking a seat across from her. "It's good to see you." "You too," Maya replied, her voice soft. "I've missed you." Elon couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. He had been so wrapped up in his work lately that he hadn't fully appreciated the importance of these moments with Maya. But now, sitting across from her, he realized just how much she meant to him. "How's everything going at NASA?" he asked, trying to shift the conversation away from his work. Maya leaned back in her chair. "Busy, as usual. But exciting. We're working closely with your team to prepare for the Mars mission. I think we're all a little nervous, to be honest. It's a huge undertaking, and there are so many unknowns." Elon nodded. "I know. But we'll figure it out. We always do." There was a pause between them, a comfortable silence as they both lost themselves in their thoughts. Elon reached across the table and took Maya's hand in his. It was a small gesture, but it carried more weight than he realized. "I've been thinking a lot about the mission," he admitted. "Not just the technical aspects. But the people, the crew who will actually go to Mars. They're going to need more than just technology. They'll need each other. They'll need support, emotionally and mentally." Maya squeezed his hand. "You're right. And you'll need support, too. You can't carry the weight of this mission by yourself." Elon sighed, feeling the exhaustion creeping back in. "Sometimes I feel like I'm already carrying it all. I don't know how to do it all. And I don't want to lose the people I care about in the process." Maya's expression softened. "You don't have to do it alone, Elon. We're all in this together. And no matter how hard it gets, you don't have to sacrifice everything else for this mission." Elon looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself believe it. Maybe he didn't have to do it all. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to balance it all. As the evening wore on, Elon felt a sense of clarity that had been eluding him for months. The road to Mars would be long, difficult, and full of challenges, both technical and emotional. But with the right people by his side, he knew they could make it. When he dropped Maya off at her apartment later that night, he kissed her on the cheek and promised, "I'll make sure we figure it out together." As he drove back to SpaceX, his mind shifted from the immediate hurdles to the future. He wasn't just building rockets. He was building a future. And with every small step forward, they were getting closer to making the impossible a reality. The months after the successful Starship test flight were a blur for Elon Musk and the SpaceX team. The media coverage was relentless, with daily updates, interviews, and speculation about the mission to Mars. But amid all the external excitement, Elon's thoughts had turned inward. The true weight of the mission was starting to settle in, and the enormity of the task ahead was overwhelming. Elon spent most of his time in meetings with his team, working on refining the Starship, improving the life support systems, and addressing the multitude of challenges that lay in the mission's future. But as the weeks passed, one issue stood out above all others: the human factor. Sending humans to Mars was one thing, but ensuring their survival once they were there was something entirely different. Even though SpaceX had made immense progress in designing the necessary technologies, the long-term viability of a human colony on Mars was still an open question. And it was a question that Elon couldn't shake. The question wasn't just about technology. It was about psychology, relationships, and what would happen when a group of people, isolated from the rest of humanity, would be forced to live and work together for an extended period. The psychological toll, the mental and emotional strain, it was something that had to be addressed before anyone set foot on Mars. As much as Elon had become synonymous with ambition, innovation, and pushing boundaries, he found himself at a crossroads. It wasn't just about conquering space. It was about ensuring that humanity could thrive once it got there. Elon sat in his office late one night, staring at the holographic projections of Mars that flickered in the dim light. The models showed Starship approaching Mars, the planet's reddish surface growing larger as the spacecraft descended. But no matter how many times he looked at the projections, the questions gnawed at him. How would the crew live? How would they maintain their mental health? How would they deal with the isolation? He was so absorbed in the holograms that he didn't hear the knock at the door. When he looked up, he saw Maya standing in the doorway. Her expression was a mixture of concern and understanding. "You've been at this for hours," she said softly, stepping into the room. "Elon, you need to rest." Elon sighed and rubbed his eyes. "I can't. There's too much to think about. Too much that could go wrong. I'm not sure we're ready for this." Maya moved closer, sitting down beside him. "You've built an empire. You've revolutionized space travel. I know you're capable of doing this, but you don't have to do it alone." He looked at her, her words sinking in. He had spent so much time thinking about the technical aspects of the mission, about the rockets, the technology, the timeline, that he hadn't given enough thought to the emotional challenges the crew would face. "I don't want to fail," he said quietly. "And it's not just about the mission. It's about the people we send. What happens to them when they're on Mars? What happens to their minds when they can't see another human being for months? What happens if they lose their will to keep going?" Maya reached over and placed her hand on his. "You're not alone in this, Elon. Your team, the scientists, the psychologists, they all want this to work, too. We all want it to work. But you have to trust that, even with all the unknowns, you're doing the right thing. You can't prepare for everything. Sometimes, you just have to take that leap." Elon let out a long breath. "It's terrifying, you know. The stakes are so high, and every decision we make could be the difference between success and failure. I can't afford to make the wrong call." "I know," Maya said. "But you've faced impossible odds before. And look where you are now." Elon smiled faintly, grateful for her words, but the doubt still lingered. He knew he couldn't ignore his fears, but he also knew that inaction wasn't an option. SpaceX had already pushed forward, and the next phase of the mission was inevitable. He stood up, moving toward the window and gazing out at the sprawling SpaceX campus. The stars above seemed to shine brighter than ever, reminding him of the mission at hand. It wasn't just about reaching Mars, it was about proving that humanity could endure, that humanity could adapt and thrive in the harshest environments. It was about reaching beyond what was comfortable, beyond what seemed possible. But was he ready to take that next step? The next few days were a whirlwind. Elon continued to meet with his team, discussing the psychological and physical challenges of the Mars mission in more depth. He called in experts from a variety of fields, psychologists, doctors, engineers, and even philosophers, anyone who might help him better understand the complex nature of human life on Mars. One meeting in particular stood out. It was with Dr. Richard Evans, a psychologist specializing in isolation and human behavior in extreme environments. Dr. Evans had spent years researching how long-term isolation affected the human mind and had worked with astronauts, submariners, and others who lived in confined, isolated spaces for long periods of time. Elon, Dr. Evans began, his voice calm but firm. The biggest challenge we face with sending humans to Mars isn't the technology. It's the human element. The isolation, the distance from Earth, the lack of immediate communication, it's going to take a toll on the crew. Elon listened intently, his mind racing with thoughts of how to mitigate the effects. What can we do to prepare them for this? Dr. Evans nodded. Training is key. The crew will need to undergo rigorous psychological training before the mission. They'll need to learn how to manage stress, how to support one another emotionally, how to stay connected with Earth without letting the distance overwhelm them. They'll also need to be trained in how to handle crises, because on Mars, there won't be a quick fix. Every problem will be a long-term challenge. Elon absorbed the information, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders. The mission to Mars had always been about technology, about exploration. But now, it was about the people who would make that journey, and their survival. Is it even possible to fully prepare for something like this? Elon asked, his voice almost a whisper. Dr. Evans paused for a moment before answering. No. There will always be unknowns. But what we can do is give them the tools to deal with those unknowns. You can't eliminate all risk, but you can make them as prepared as possible. Later that day, as the sun began to set over the SpaceX campus, Elon sat alone in his office, lost in thought. The weight of the mission was more real than ever before. The technical challenges were daunting, but the human element, the people, were at the forefront of his mind. The people who would live on Mars, who would make history. The risks were greater than ever before, but so were the stakes. This wasn't just about sending a spacecraft to Mars. It was about sending a message to the world: humanity was ready to take its next step in the universe. Elon leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. The road ahead was long, and the obstacles would be many. But there was no turning back now. The mission to Mars was more than just his dream, it was the future of humanity. And he was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The mission to Mars had evolved from an ambitious dream into a near reality. The journey ahead was no longer a matter of if, it was a matter of when. Every person involved in the mission, from the engineers to the astronauts, was bracing themselves for what would come next. The countdown to launch had begun, and it was unlike any mission SpaceX had ever embarked on. Elon Musk stood before a massive screen in the SpaceX control room, his eyes scanning the timeline of events that would unfold in the coming days. The clock was ticking. Every aspect of the mission, from the readiness of the Starship to the psychological preparation of the crew, had been meticulously planned. Yet, as always, Elon felt the weight of the unknown bearing down on him. No matter how much they had prepared, they were about to venture into uncharted territory, literally. He was joined by his core team, including Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX, and his lead engineers. The sense of anticipation in the room was palpable. The countdown was now only days away, and the reality of what they were about to achieve was settling in. This wasn't just another milestone for SpaceX. This was humanity's first true step beyond Earth. And Elon knew that this moment would define not only his legacy but the future of the human race. We've done everything we can to prepare, Gwynne said, her voice steady as she scanned the data on her tablet. The Starship is in peak condition. Life support systems are all functional. The crew has completed their final training. It's time. Elon nodded but didn't speak right away. His mind was still racing with the countless variables, the unforeseen challenges that could arise at any moment. He had always been the one to push for more, to demand the impossible, but now, as the final stage of preparation began, the magnitude of the task hit him with full force. "What are you thinking, Elon?" Gwyn asked, her tone gentle but knowing. Elon took a deep breath. "I'm thinking about the people, the crew. This isn't just about technology. This is about lives. We're sending people into the unknown, and there's no turning back. I just want to make sure they're ready for everything." Gwyn looked him in the eyes, her expression unwavering. "You've done everything you can. They're ready. And more importantly, you're ready." Elon smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. The truth was, he wasn't sure if he was ready. But there was no time for doubt. The mission had reached its final phase, and the whole world was watching. The night before the launch, Elon found himself at SpaceX headquarters, sitting in his office, alone. The usual bustle of activity had quieted, and the building was eerily still. Elon had always been comfortable with solitude, but tonight, it felt different. The silence was overwhelming. His phone buzzed on his desk, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at it and saw a text message from Maya. "Are you okay?" He stared at the words for a moment before replying. "Yeah. Just thinking about everything." A few moments later, she responded. "I know it's a lot. But you've prepared for this your whole life. You're not alone in this, Elon. You have the team, the astronauts, and me." Elon leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel the comfort of her words. He hadn't fully realized how much he needed her presence until now. "Thank you, Maya. I don't know what I would do without you." He paused before adding. "I'm just afraid. There's so much that could go wrong. And I don't want to fail them." A moment passed before she responded. "Failure isn't the end, Elon. It's part of the journey. What you're doing is changing the world, and no one can do that without a little fear. It means you care. But I believe in you. I believe in all of you." Elon smiled softly, his heart warming at her words. She was right, as always. The fear was just a sign of how much this mission meant. And that fear didn't have to hold him back. The following morning, the countdown to launch was officially underway. SpaceX's headquarters was alive with activity as the final checks were made. The crew was briefed one last time, and the media had gathered outside to witness history in the making. The world's attention was focused on this moment. Elon stood by the launch pad, watching as the Starship loomed in the distance. The massive rocket was a testament to the hard work, innovation, and determination of everyone at SpaceX. It was ready to take humanity's first step toward Mars. But even as the rocket stood tall, Elon couldn't shake the tension in his chest. Gwyn walked up to him, offering a reassuring smile. "It's time." Elon nodded. "Yeah. It's time." He watched as the crew boarded the Starship, their faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. These were the first humans who would journey to Mars, the first people to leave Earth's atmosphere with the goal of never returning. They were about to make history. As the final minutes ticked away, Elon stood in silence, his mind racing through every decision, every moment that had led to this point. And then, in the blink of an eye, the countdown hit 0. Liftoff. The roar of the engines filled the air as the Starship shot into the sky, its engines blazing as it left Earth's atmosphere behind. Elon watched in awe as the rocket disappeared into the sky, the realization of the impossible taking shape before his eyes. This was it. Humanity was on its way to Mars. The days following the launch were a whirlwind. The world watched as the Starship made its journey through space, the crew reporting back from their capsule, each update a step closer to Mars. But as the mission progressed, Elon couldn't help but feel the weight of the journey, both the physical and emotional toll it was taking on him and the crew. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. The mission to Mars wasn't just his dream anymore. It was the dream of humanity. And he had helped make it happen. In the days that followed, Elon continued to work tirelessly, his mind always focused on the next steps, the next phase of the mission. But as he sat down to dinner with Maya one evening, he realized that, for the first time in a long time, he could finally take a step back and breathe. They were on the verge of something extraordinary. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?